Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever caught yourself just sitting there in a dark room at 2 a.m., wrapped up in a blanket, munching on snacks, and doing absolutely nothing of substance? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're diving deep into the roots of modern burnout. We're going to figure out why so many people today feel, well, completely dead inside. And we'll unpack how this feeling went from a super niche internet joke to a massive global psychological state.
So why do we feel like we have no future? And why is it literally so hard to just pick a movie to watch? Let's kick things off by looking at the internet subculture of dead inside gamers. Believe it or not, this whole thing actually traces back to 2014. There was this Dota 2 streamer, a la Dance, who famously blurted out during a match, "I am dead inside, I don't care about the game." Right around that exact same time, the anime Tokyo Ghoul dropped. That show featured a main character who becomes totally cold, empty, and just disconnected from the normal world. And what started out as this hyper-specific aesthetic for gamers who stayed up way past dawn, it slowly morphed into a global mood for millions of millennials and Gen Zers who are honestly just tired of trying.
I mean, the symptoms are almost painfully relatable. You've got this whole catalog of cinematic masterpieces to watch, right? Yet you spend the entire evening just endlessly scrolling TikTok. You constantly push back starting that new book or going for a run. You stay up insanely late, sacrificing sleep just to get a little bit of me time for the day. You know, revenge bedtime procrastination? Or maybe you absolutely dread answering simple text messages, and you're just living strictly weekend to weekend. These aren't just lazy habits, they're symptoms. It's a modern epidemic of emptiness, a whole generation running on empty and stuck in pure survival mode. Sociologist Corey Keyes and psychologist Adam Grant actually have a word for this widespread feeling of low energy. They call it languishing. Now, this isn't necessarily clinical depression. It's not a disease. It's more like a distinct absence of life energy. It's just stagnation. Adam Grant famously called this the dominant emotion of the pandemic era in a 2021 piece. But let's be real, this feeling of just going through the motions, that's been brewing for a lot longer than that.
Section 1. The paradox of choice, and why having more options actually hurts us.
So why are we languishing? Is it because life is just too hard, or maybe way too overwhelming? To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look back at Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology. He studied exactly when and why people massively lose their sense of meaning. Now, obviously, meaning vanishes during major crises like financial crashes. But Durkheim discovered something wild, this concept called anomie. He showed that people lose their sense of meaning not just during economic downturns, but also during sudden economic booms. When wealth and options absolutely skyrocket, the societal rules that usually tell us what is enough completely break down.
History actually gives us a brilliant example of this. During Italy's super rapid economic rise in the 1870s, suicides shockingly spiked by 36%. I know, right? Why? Because society's expectations were shifting way too fast. When you remove the boundaries of what a person should desire, human desires basically become infinite. People just don't know what to strive for anymore. And it turns out that lack of boundaries creates deep, deep psychological distress.
And that brings us to a really common modern version of anomie. Psychologist Barry Schwartz calls it the paradox of choice. There's this famous experiment where grocery shoppers were given either 24 varieties of jam to sample or just 6. Now, the massive display of 24 jams definitely attracted a larger crowd, but only 3% of those people actually bought anything. But when there were just 6 jams, a whopping 30% made a purchase. Having limitless options, whether it's jams on a grocery store shelf, endless potential career paths, or thousands of movies on Netflix, it actually paralyzes us. Every single choice feels like a missed opportunity for something else, so we end up choosing absolutely nothing.
Section 2. The aesthetic of hopelessness and the rise of doomer culture.
Okay, so how on earth did the internet take this deep sociological paralysis and turn it into a globally recognized aesthetic? Well, we can track this right through the evolution of the doomer meme. It actually started way back in 2008 with adult apocalypse preppers who were obsessed with peak oil. Basically the idea that our petroleum-based society was on the brink of collapse. Then, flash forward to 2018, and 4chan had distilled this entire vibe into a cartoon of a 23-year-old guy in a beanie smoking a cigarette with these huge bags under his eyes, just mourning his total lack of a future. By the time the 2020 lockdowns rolled around, the doomer girl was born. This meme tapped into a massive cultural vein. It was especially huge in post-Soviet spaces, where brutalist concrete panel buildings and dark snowy nights basically became the visual export of hopelessness for the entire world.
But you could argue the real global capital of this aesthetic is Japan. This whole vibe draws heavily on Japanese anime and a profound cultural concept known as mono no aware. This basically translates to the sad, fleeting charm of things. Picture cherry blossoms blooming beautifully, and then immediately falling to the ground. In Western pop culture, we're usually told to fight sadness, right? Conquer it, push through. But Japanese culture, which is so deeply influenced by a long history of impermanence and natural disasters, teaches something different. It teaches that sadness isn't necessarily a bug to be cured, but rather a beautiful, melancholic state to just inhabit.
And wow, this mindset is spread globally, creating entire generations defined by apathy. In Japan, they call it the Satori generation. These are young people who've supposedly achieved enlightenment simply by giving up all desires for cars, careers, or relationships after watching the economic bubble burst. Over in South Korea, you've got the Enpo generation, who are abandoning traditional life milestones one by one. In China, isolated youths are sometimes referred to as rat people. And from Russia, we're seeing this massive global export of cold, brutalist post-punk doomer music. Think of bands like Molchat Doma. We're talking about millions of people all over the globe flat out refusing the traditional paths of striving and hustling.
Section 3. The cancellation of the future and the slow loss of tomorrow.
Let's dig into the philosophical root of this problem. Why does everyone suddenly feel like progress has just stopped? Think about how folks in the mid-20th century viewed the future. The 20th century was completely obsessed with this bright, utopian future. We're talking flying cars, space colonies, this unending, linear march of human progress. But instead, we got the cyberpunk reality, the classic high-tech, low-life. Sure, we have incredibly advanced smartphones and mind-blowing AI, but we're living in tiny, cramped, concrete apartments under the shadow of mega-corporations. The future definitely arrived, but the living standards? Yeah, they didn't really come with it.
The legendary sci-fi author William Gibson, who actually pioneered the cyberpunk genre, noted that this technological dystopia seemed to arrive in Japan first. The glowing neon signs towering over cramped noodle shops in the rain, that imagery showed the world that the future only truly benefits a wealthy corporate elite. The average person, they just get a longer workday and a shiny glowing screen to stare into until they fall asleep.
And politically speaking, we kind of lost our imagination. Back in 1989, political scientist Francis Fukuyama famously argued that we had hit the end of history. His theory was that with the end of the Cold War, liberal capitalism was the final winning formula for human society, which meant we could no longer even imagine a radically new world. The grand ideological battles were officially over. From that point on, our future was basically reduced to just receiving minor software updates to the reality we already have.
The crucial point here was perfectly captured by the Italian philosopher Franco Bifo Berardi. He coined this brilliant, if depressing phrase, the slow cancellation of the future. He observed that our culture literally stopped inventing new visions. Instead, we just started endlessly recycling the past. I mean, just look at the box office today. It's nothing but remakes, reboots, and the 10th installments of superhero franchises. We aren't creating a bold new tomorrow anymore. We're just consuming repackaged versions of yesterday.
To describe this feeling, cultural theorist Mark Fisher popularized the concept of hauntology. Originally coming from Jacques Derrida, hauntology perfectly explains why we feel this weird, lingering nostalgia for futures that never actually happened. Take the Frutiger Arrow aesthetic from the early 2000s, for example. Remember that? Glossy icons, realistic water drops, lush green grass. It promised this beautiful, seamless harmony between tech and nature. We are quite literally haunted by the ghost of that optimistic, friendly future. Because what do we get instead? Sterile, flat design apps and AI systems that are actively threatening our jobs.
Which brings us to Section 4, apathy as a protest or just resting on the couch.
But hold on a second. Before we pack it in and declare this a total soul-crushing defeat for our generation, let's look at how history actually reframes this whole epidemic of emptiness. Because apathy, it isn't just a 21st century internet invention. It has always existed as a human response to a highly chaotic world. Way back in the 10th century BC, King Solomon was lamenting that all is vanity. Fast forward to 1853, Herman Melville writes about Bartleby, a clerk who famously replies to every single request with a polite, "I would prefer not to." In 1859, Russian literature introduced us to Oblomov, a guy who literally refuses to leave his couch for 150 pages because he just sees absolutely no point in participating in society. And then in 1970, poet Joseph Brodsky wrote the famous line, "Don't leave the room, don't make a mistake." Today, that exact same historical thread is continuing in an incredibly powerful way over in China, with the Tang Ping movement, which translates to lying flat.
Young people over there are actively, consciously refusing to participate in the relentless, grueling economic rat race. Rather than breaking their backs striving to buy a house they'll never afford or working themselves to an early grave, they are intentionally choosing to do the absolute bare minimum.
Back in 2021, a user named Lu Huazhang posted a manifesto online, boldly declaring that lying flat was a conscious, philosophical choice to reclaim his own humanity. And let me tell you, this anonymous post absolutely terrified the media and censorship machines. They immediately scrubbed it from the internet. But why? Because it revealed a form of resistance that authority literally cannot crush. Think about it. You can force a crowd to stop rioting, sure, but how on earth do you force a whole generation to care? How do you mandate ambition?
So as we all sit here waiting for the so-called end of history to finally end, I want to leave you with this to ponder. Is our modern apathy, our widespread languishing, this whole dead-inside internet culture, is it truly a failure? Or are we, collectively, just resting on the couch, refusing to play a completely rigged game and gathering the strength we need to eventually stand up and change the world? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.